a galaxy of panelists and experts today to teach us, and I think we would be wiser at the end of 1 hour or 1.5 hours. And to introduce our first speaker today is Dr. Saroj Purohit. She is a senior professor at SMS Medical College, Jaipur, and a very well-known personality in Rajasthan. We also have amongst us none other than Manasda, Dr. Manas Chatterjee, who seems very familiar to all of we Rajasthani dermatologists. He's a prolific writer and a prolific.
I'm a part Rajasthani.
Yeah, I know that.
I've been in Jodhpur.
Yes, I know that. So, in fact, he seems to be one amongst us.
Yes.
So he's an excellent teacher. He's an excellent writer, speaker, and he's a very well-read person. He has been a past president of ACSI and chairman of IADWEL Academy, very prestigious post. He has been an editor designate for IJD. So this he will hold the office. He has been on the editorial board of several journals, including IDOJ, IJDWEL. He had been an SIG coordinator for dermoscopy. He has been awarded by the Chief of the Army Staff. He has several awards to his credit, including Dr. K.N. Saxena Memorial Award, IADWEL President Appreciation Award in 2015, IADWEL Teacher Par Excellence in 2016, I guess, and Dr. P.N. Bahal Oration Award. So these are some of the awards that he has been credited with. He's an excellent, speaker, erudite teacher, and whatnot. So we will be, listening to him. He moderating a session with a vast galaxy of the panelists that we have today, both from Rajasthan as well as from the other states, including Dr. Kharkar, who happens to be from Mumbai. He has been trained in AIDS medicine from Luxembourg, and he has worked with several specialists across the world, including Dr. Robert Hammer and Dr. Kenneth Arndt. And he has worked intensively and extensively in HIV medicine. He is currently the medical advisor to AIDS Combat International India. He has been a practicing dermatologist in Andheri and Malad for last 30 years.
Sorry to interrupt. In between, I can see the phone of Dr. S.R. Shukla. So I will welcome Dr. S.R. Shukla on the panel. He's today's chairperson. We were waiting for that. So good evening and welcome, Dr. Shukla Sahib.
Hello.
Yes,
yeah, thank you very much.
Good evening, sir. Good, Dr. Shukla sir. Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening.
We
Good evening.
On board. And I was just introducing the speakers and the moderator and the panelists.
Yeah.
We have several eminent panelists amongst us today. Dr. Kharkar, I had just introduced you to.
Yeah.
Then we have Dr. U.S. Agarwal, ex-dean and principal and controller, SMS Medical College, professor and head. He is well known to us. He is also the organizing chairperson of the Dermacon 2022, going to be held at Jaipur, and you are all invited to that. Dr. Singhi sir has been HOD, ex-professor and head from Dr. SN Medical College, Jodhpur. We also had Dr. Deepak Mathur from SMS Medical College, additional principal and professor and head at the SMS Medical College. We have Dr. Manisha Nijawan as the president of the IADWEL State Branch, Rajasthan. Dr. R.D. Mehta, a very eminent speaker and a good, very gentle personality, a very close friend of mine. Dr. Vinod Jain from Jodhpur. Dr. Ram Gulati, again a very well-read person, a good academician. Dr. Saurabh Shukla is a young budding dermatologist from AIIMS Jodhpur, and he has contributed to us several papers today through the WhatsApp. And I think without much of ado, we start with today's main speaker, Dr. Saroj Purohit. Dr. Saroj, you are welcome to the.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for such kind words.
Two lines in between.
Sure.
Those who is speaking, they only open their mic. The rest of all, they are requested to mute themselves for the conduction of the session, and they can even close their audio as well as video both.
Hi, Dr. Vinod Jain. Good evening.
Hello.
You have missed your
Good evening, sir.
Good evening, sir. Good evening, boss.
So we start the session with Dr. Saroj Purohit as our speaker, and she'll be speaking on dermatology during COVID era, particularly focusing on psoriasis. So you are welcome, Dr. Saroj.
Thank you, Dr. Lalit, for such kind words. Now, it was adjusted. Yeah. Fine. Respected seniors, colleagues, juniors, and my dear students, I welcome you all to this evening and a very good evening to all of you. The topic today is COVID and psoriasis. With such distinguished and learned panelists, dermatologists present in the meeting room, I think we do not have to go into details about psoriasis. Most of them know everything.
Can you make
But
it
because it is call of the day, so we have to begin with the slide. And let me begin with the first slide. Now, why it is actually psoriasis is
on the full
very
screen,
common.
please.
It's on the full screen, sir.
No.
From my side, it is.
No.
It is not on full screen.
On side of the screen, your other slides are
Okay.
It's for you.
Okay, sir, I'll
you
try.
get the better presentation. Otherwise, you'll be missing. No, make it on the full screen.
Yeah, I'm trying, sir.
Vinod Jain has also come. Hi, Vinod. Very good, Doctor. You are, yes, this is on full. Anyway,
Yes.
doesn't matter. You go ahead, please.
Is that full? Yeah. Right. So now it is on the full screen.
Yes, it is. It is.
Okay. So I welcome you all once again. And basically, psoriasis is a very common dermatological disease present in almost 3 to 5% of the population. And the treatment, the main mode of treatment is basically immunosuppressives. And it becomes significant in this era of COVID, because COVID, as we have all known, that it is basically affecting those people or persons or patients who are immunosuppressed or immunocompromised. So, and as we are treating patients of psoriasis with immunocompromised drugs, so the point of discussion is whether we should give them or we should continue with the traditional drugs that we gave, which were not immunosuppressive drugs. Maybe like we used to give earlier, Puasol or Pua therapy or acetretin. Yeah, so this is the main crux of the slide that we are going to present. Now, COVID-19 is a new corona infection which started in China in December in 2019, and it spread to the rest of the world. And in January 2020, WHO termed the name as virus SARS-CoV-2, and it was very similar to the other SARS, which was outbreak which was available in 2002 and 12. So the ongoing SARS-CoV-2, it has become a pandemic, and it is of great public health and concern to the whole of the world as of today. Now, psoriasis, we know, is an immune-mediated disease which affects almost 3% of the population. How it is treated by targeting the effector cytokines identified as crucial in the pathogenesis of the disease, and the common ones of which are tumor necrosis alpha. Can you hear my voice?
You are audible. Don't worry.
Yes.
Now it is all right. Now it is on the full screen. Don't
Yes,
worry.
Thank you. So psoriasis is an immune-mediated disease affecting almost 3% of the population, and the treated targeting effector cytokines identified, as we all know, tumor necrosis alpha, interleukin 12, 23, 17, and the usual approach of treating the disease is giving immunosuppressive drugs. Okay, it's going a bit slow. So recently, some concern about the possibility that cytokine-directed immunosuppressive treatment may be a risk factor for SARS-CoV-2 infection in psoriatic patients. So, because definitely these are immunosuppressive drugs, so as it is the SARS-CoV-2 is going to affect people who are immunosuppressed. So this is a point of concern in dermatology. The pandemic scenario changed very rapidly with new data being available on clinical and serological front. So what we are seeing today may not be the situation even tomorrow. So that will keep varying. And from past, we have learned certain lessons which we will discuss. And first, we will talk about members of coronavirus have caused two major outbreaks in the past. First one was in 2002 and 3, that was with SARS-CoV-1, during which 8,400 individuals became infected. It was very less compared to what we are having today, and the overall mortality was just 10%. And 10 years later, in 2012, you had MERS-CoV, which was again an epidemic, not a pandemic, and affected Middle Asia, and it lasted for 6 years and infected just 2,200 people, and the death rate was but very high, it was 36%. So when we compare to the COVID-2 that we are having today, it is spread to the whole world, millions have evolved, and in addition, but the death rate is very less, which is a good thing about this COVID-2. Now, SARS and psoriasis, concerning the pathogenesis of SARS and MERS, it seems that Th1 activation is associated with high production of pro-inflammatory cytokines, which plays a pivotal role in the disease. Cytokines such as interleukin 1, 6, 12, and chemokines such as interleukin 2, CCL2, CXCL10 were elevated in SARS patients, and this diminished in patients that recovered. So once the patient recovered, it was seen these cytokines, they decreased. So, and also led to a formation of virus antigen antibody response. So these inflammatory cytokines are the ones which are responsible for COVID-2. Moreover, the pro-inflammatory cytokine genes such as interleukin 1, 6, tumor necrosis factor, and chemokines such as CXCL1, CCL20 were found to be overexpressed in SARS-CoV-1 infection in some data. And in MARS, a worse outcome was associated because the mortality rate, as you've seen, was higher with higher levels of interleukin 10, CXCL10, and high levels of, so the cytokines were different in basically MERS and SARS-1. So it's very difficult to remember all these interleukins and cytokines, but we have to present them, right? So the recent report have shown that infection with SARS-CoV-2 induces the production of interleukin 1 beta, interferon alpha, IP10, MCP1. So the concentration of IP10 and MCP1 is directly related to the severity of the disease and probability being admitted to the ICU. So this cytokine is basically associated with the severity of COVID. Now, since there are also reports that SARS-CoV-2 that we are having now may induce production of, in addition to Th1, it might also cause production of Th2 type cytokines. So further studies are needed to clarify the role of cytokine storm in this disease. High levels of interleukin 2, 7, same which have been covered, GM, CSF, PI, MIPI, alpha, tumor necrosis factor, alpha, have been correlated with the disease severity in COVID-2. It was suggested that cytokine storm is responsible for massive tissue destruction, and it relates to the severity. It's the same thing which is being covered again. Now we have COVID-19 and the viral immune response. Now I think this is basically present in all the viral diseases. First of all, let's see the diagram. You have droplet infection. It reaches the respiratory system. Then the antigens, they enter the alveoli, they stick to the epithelium of the alveoli, and as a result of which you have interferons being released, and these stimulate the macrophages, that is stage 4. And these macrophages, they differentiate, help in differentiation of the T helper cells. And these T and B helper cells, B is going to produce, differentiate into plasma cells, and that is going to produce antibodies. And whereas the other end, the T helper cells, they will produce interferons. These are the cytokines, interferons, tumor necrosis factors, interleukin 12, 23, 6, 4. So all of them, they are further going to lead to differentiation of these cells. And as a result of which you are, the 7th step is the resulting inflammatory cytokines and antibodies continue to stimulate the production of additional cytokines and antibodies, which may contribute to the cytokine storm, as is noted in the severe diseases. So they further lead to response. It's a cascade of chain of events, They themselves, again, they are going to lead to differentiation. More of inflammatory products are going to be released. And as a result of which, there is more influx of mast cells, neutrophils, basophils, So again, the cascade of events is going to start. So I think that is even for COVID-2 plus, as well as the other any viral disease that we are talking about. So the target of common dermatological immunomodulators and immunosuppressants. Now, this is basically a cell. Here you can see a T cell. The central part is the nucleus. Then you have the wall, cell wall, which is present. So when the antigen, the virus comes, you can see at the bottom, it comes to the antigen presenting cell, it attaches to it, and it leads to a cascade of events which occur. So in the nucleus, you have certain drugs which are used to stop the proliferation of this virus. For that, we are giving DNA replication drugs which are antimetabolites like azathioprine, methotrexate. Then in addition, even mycophenolate, mofetil is also used. And on the membrane, not the nuclear part, you have, these are the receptors. I think the pointer is being seen. These are the receptors of interleukin 17. And these drugs, these are biologics, basically, they are acting, or you can say they are inhibiting these receptors, as a result of which the inflammatory action which is going to occur, which leads to a destruction of the cells, is going to be stopped. Further down, we have these intercepts which block the tumor necrosis alpha receptor fusion proteins. This is the protein which is blocked, whereas adalimumab, it blocks the receptor. Here it is blocking the proteins, and these biologics, they are blocking the receptors. So these again, then you have calcineurin inhibitors like cyclosporine, tacrolimus. So they also lead to inhibition of this chain of inflammatory reaction. And similarly, glucocorticoids, apremilast, it inhibits phosphodiesterase 4. So as a result of these, if they are not stopped, you have an inflammatory mediators being released here. These colorful cells are all inflammatory mediators. So when we stop them, they decrease, as a result of which the inflammation in psoriasis is stopped. So is it time to limit the treatment of immunosuppressants? Why? Because as we have seen, immunosuppression might, when we are using immunosuppression for psoriasis, might lead to COVID infection in the patients. So based on the previous cases of death or increased risk of infections from viral disease in immunosuppressive patients, the importance of a therapeutic reassessment of all psoriatic patients chronically treated with immunosuppressive drugs that weaken the immune system and make them more susceptible to opportunistic infections, which can be the viral infections, can even be bacterial infections, can be fungal, defungal infections, but we are dealing with the COVID at present. So cyclosporines, methotrexate, anti-tumor necrosis alpha are among the first choices which are used for treatment of psoriatic patients who have PASI score greater than 10, and they are normally prescribed for healthy individuals who are free from any cardiovascular disease or any comorbidities. But on the other hand, we also consider that in patients with erythrodermic psoriasis or severe psoriatic arthritis, immunosuppressive treatment are essential because we cannot treat them with just maybe azathioprine, we cannot treat them with PUA therapy or apremilast. So these are required. But on the other hand, we must not overlook the immunosuppressive effect of these drugs, which can presently increase the risk of infectious complications in COVID era. So it is a double-edged sword, which we have to work very cautiously on. Although the rapid effect of these drugs is well demonstrated, it must be considered that the psoriatic patients on these immunosuppressive drugs like cyclosporine, methotrexate, they are partly immunodepressed. So they are not so immunosuppressive. So what the author, the person who has conducted this study in dermatological therapy here, so he says they are partly immunodepressed with an increased risk of opportunistic infection, and to date, it is unknown whether there may be an increased risk of COVID infection in these patients who are on these regimes, cyclosporine, methotrexate. Now, COVID and psoriasis with definitive evidences that biologics blocking tumor necrosis alpha, anti-interleukin 17 increase the risk of COVID. It is lacking. Now here it is saying it is lacking. Definitive evidences are lacking. So we believe that preventive treatment discontinuation should be avoided till there are clear-cut evidences that yes, if the patient is given, he will definitely develop COVID. But such clear-cut evidences are not present. We just know that the patient's immunity is suppressed, but that does not mean he will develop COVID-19. So we believe that preventive treatment discontinuation should be avoided and reserved for patients who are already COVID infected or patients who have active symptoms or who have been in contact with confirmed patients of COVID-19. So basically, if you are continuing the treatment, you do not have to stop it unless he has symptoms. And unnecessary biologic discontinuation would lead to worsening of psoriasis and especially psoriatic arthritis and erythroderma in quite a number of patients. Now, consideration for commonly used immunomodulators and immunosuppressants for dermatologic conditions, which are the normal immunosuppressives that we use. So here is the mechanism of action. These are the common immunosuppressives that we use. What it wants to hint here is they have mild to moderate risk. So we need not stop giving to the patients, especially who are severely infected with psoriasis, affected with psoriasis, or who have arthritis, who have erythroderma. And in the last, you have phosphodiesterase inhibition, that is apremilast, which is, according to this table, it has the lowest risk involvement. So these drugs, they should be continued. In all of them, this is what he is trying to stress. If there are mild symptoms, you can continue. If the worsening of the patient, if high-grade fever, if the symptoms get worsened, then you have to stop it. Now, this is all theoretical, the real world experience according to the studies, some of the individuals who have done, authors who have done. Now, there is some evidence of COVID-19 symptoms and a rapid recovery of patients receiving guselkumab and exilizumab. So here it is a opposite. Those patients who had COVID symptoms, when these biologics were given, they recovered. So as I'm saying, scenario is changing every day. Tomorrow, day after tomorrow, there might be a new study. In one of the studies, patients who were having these symptoms, they recovered with these guselkumab and exilizumab. Conti, he reported that some elderly psoriatic patients who were receiving ciclukimab and adalimumab were completely unreceptive to COVID. Again, there's another study, elderly patients, they did not get, not a single person got COVID when he was on these biologics. So that, according to that, this is going to have a protective role on infection from COVID. And another author, he reported that now we are coming to biologics over, now we are coming on to apremilast in COVID and with psoriasis. So some Megiddo author, Dr. Megiddo, he reported that patients of psoriasis on apremilast contracted severe COVID-19. So according to them, what they are promoting is it is very safe, it has got less risk. But patient, he developed severe COVID, but the positive point they got in that was that COVID was clinically cured within weeks of admission to an intensive care unit without stopping the apremilast therapy. So it was not required to stop that apremilast. They continued with same treatment in those patients, and they were admitted to the ICU and they recovered. So that is the good point about it. The authors concluded that safety of apremilast COVID-19 was confirmed. How it was safety when he is contracting COVID-19. So it's double-edged sword. As I said, we have to work very cautiously, which way will be safer. Now, in another report by Olseva, he suggested that ongoing treatment with phosphodiesterase inhibitors, that is apremilast, might play a protective role against infection COVID-19. Now, there's a proposed treatment algorithm. What is the schedule that you should follow while treating a patient of psoriasis, of systemically treated psoriatic patients during this COVID-19 period? They might not be having COVID-19, but any psoriatic patient who comes to us, how should we proceed? But that Krach, he has already said in the end, before that, I'll mention here, he said that the patient is positive or symptomatic for SARS or COVID-19, all immunomodulators medication should be discontinued. So the Krach, so he has already given in the beginning, not in the beginning, in the middle, but the algorithm we'll see here. Now, this is the chart. It is showing first two drugs, apremilast and acetaminophen, they are non-immunosuppressive. The only thing worth mentioning here is these two drugs, they are non-immunosuppressive. The rest of all the drugs, biologics, interleukin inhibitors, 17, 12, 23, JAK inhibitors, TNF alpha inhibitors, they are all mildly to moderate immunosuppressive effect. And so when starting them, as far as possible, if you can delay the treatment with these, we should delay and start with a safer option, maybe acetaminophen, apremilast. One thing to be noted is in this slide, nowhere PUA therapy or PUA SOL therapy is written, where I remember in our good old days when we were doing a PG and beyond that, we were giving so much and we were getting same amount of response also. The patients of psoriasis responded even at that time. But in this PowerPoint, there's no mention of PUA SOL or PUA therapy. So as far as possible, they should immunosuppressants should be delayed, or if we have to give, then we should have a very good protective method, wear masks, ask the patient to avoid going out, meeting other people. So aggressive patient protection measures should be taken. Now, in the end, cyclosporine, methotrexate, again is strong. These are all moderate to mild type of immunosuppressants. Cyclosporine and methotrexate, they are moderate to strong type of immunosuppressants. So this chart is basically, I think this is the most important chart of all the PPT, telling you that apremilast and acetaminophen are non-immunosuppressive. The biologics are all mild to moderate suppressants. Cyclosporine, methotrexates are strongly moderate to strong immunosuppressants, and corticosteroids should not be used. As it is, we all know we do not really use corticosteroids in psoriasis unless there is erythroderma or pustular type of psoriasis or something. So do not initiate it unless unavoidable, and dose tapering before discontinuation from the patient is very important. We all know that because it is a strong immunosuppressive drug. So I think we are nearing to conclusion. In patients with active infections, systemic conventional medications, these which include methotrexate, cyclosporine, azathioprine, therapy, JAK inhibitors, biologics for psoriasis should be temporarily held until there is more data available about the safety profile of these drugs, especially in COVID patients. Otherwise, on the second note, again, it is mentioning conventional systemic immunosuppressive medications like corticosteroids, methotrexate, cyclosporin, azathioprine, are also associated with increased infection risk and therefore require strict measures to minimize exposure to patient maybe with COVID contact should be minimum, so that we can safely, if the patient is already on these medications, we can safely continue. If he does not develop COVID infection, if it is not in contact with the patient who is having COVID-19 infection. So that is again important. We can start with the conventional regimes, but we have to take protective measures for the patient. So finally, it wants to include that apremilast and acitretin are not associated with increased infection risk and appear to be having the most safety profile. And so I think starting with the conventional therapy, which personal, my opinion, what I would suggest is we would go in for a PUA sole or PUA therapy, and then maybe if the patient is not responding, then he has suggested yes, methotrexate. He's against methotrexate. I think because it is a very effective and it is very cheap drug also, because biologics I think not everybody can afford. So then if it does not respond, we can go to apremilast, and acitretin I think not. We can, as we go in the discussion, we can take the benefit of the knowledge of senior dermatologists, senior teachers who have experience of using apremilast and acitretin. So I think this is the last slide. I would thank you once again for listening to me so patiently. Thank you, sir. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saroj. I would invite, I welcome Dr. Rishi Bhargav, sir, who is on the panel. Dr. S.R. Shukla, sir, is here. Dr. N.K. Mathur, sir, will also. So, sir, please kindly bless us with your few words. Dr. Rishi Bhargav, sir, and Dr. S.R. Shukla, sir, and Dr. N.K. Mathur, sir. So that, and after that, we will start the panel discussion. Dr. Bhargav, sir, you are muted, sir. Up unmute kar lein. Dr. Shukla is also muted. Shukla sir, aap bhi muted hai.
Yes.
हाँ, Bhargav sir.
I was listening to Saroj patiently.
Yes, sir.
And I have a very strong comment.
Yes, sir.
Psoriasis is important or COVID is important?
Equally important, sir. In this era, I think psoriasis is equally important.
Psoriasis will continue for whole of life. COVID will last for 14 days, which is not complicated. And complicated will last for 4 to 6 weeks, whether you live in this world or not. It is not important to consider all these things. It is important to save yourself from COVID. That is my view.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Dr. Shukla, sir.
Yes, I fully agree with Dr. Bhargav Saab. You know, psoriasis is not a disease which, if you are not treating during COVID, something will go wrong. I mean, you can wait for that. COVID will stay just for 2 weeks or 3 weeks at the most. So it's not that important. So whatever is going on with this, you need not start the immunosuppressive drugs. If you already is taking or he or she is taking any local therapy or the apremilast or something like that, let it be continued. But otherwise, there is no need of starting immunosuppressives or anything like that.
Very nice.
I fully agree with Dr. Bhargav sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. And can we, with the permission, can we further continue the panel discussion? Dr. Panel Manas Chatterjee is here from Calcutta. Dr. Manas.
Yes, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to sort of start the panel discussion. With all due deference, we are going to discuss psoriasis and we are going to discuss immunosuppressives just for one reason. It's a fact that in an individual patient, the condition will last for a few days. But the problem is the pandemic is going to last for months, maybe years. And therefore, the institution of drugs in these situations definitely merits a discussion, because it's not the issue of a one patient developing the condition. It's a question of the duration of the pandemic, which is months. We don't know, maybe years. So with that, sort of in that background, we're going to start talking. So we've got a real galaxy of panelists. I'm just going to read out their names. Professor U.S. Agarwal, Professor M.K. Singhi, Dr. Deepak Mathur, Kishore Singh, Dr. Manisha Nijavan, Dr. Kharkar, Dr. R.D. Mehta, Dr. Vinod Jain, Dr. R.D. Kharkar, that is Dr. R.D. Mehta, Dr. Vinod Jain, Dr. Lalit Gupta, Dr. Kailash Merania, Dr. Ram Gulati, and last but definitely not the least, Dr. Saurabh Singh. So that is the galaxy of panelists. Hello, am I audible?
Yeah, Manis, you are.
Okay.
Yes, you are very much audible. And I request all others to please, those who are not speaking at that time, please mute yourself so that we can comfortably.
So I would, so we will start this panel discussion. And the first question is, we keep talking about this. We talk about the fact that, doctors who are, beyond 60 have comorbidities or are pregnant. We know now that, large number of dermatologists are from the paler sex and the dominant sex rather. So therefore, it is important for us to think, is this valid anymore? Is it something which is important anymore? Is it something which we need to discuss? I'm going to ask Dr. Mehta to sort of elucidate on this. Is it something which is still valid? Do we ask people above 60 to stop seeing patients, or those having comorbidities or who are pregnant? Is it acceptable at all? Dr. Mehta, you are mute. You are on mute. I think Dr. Mehta, you are on mute. Yes, you are okay.
Rajesh, you please unmute yourself.
You again become mute. You've again become mute, sir. You've again become mute.
Yes, now Rajesh, you have to unmute yourself. Rajesh, you are muted. Rajesh, can you listen me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. No,
Again, it is mute. You just remove your cursor from there.
Now it's okay.
It's fine, sir.
Yes, thank you.
I'm audible, sir. Okay.
Yes,
sir. Please go ahead.
We are living in a real chaotic scenario, and it is just walking on a tightrope. And medical science, not only for the healthcare professionals or otherwise, has become more of a philosophy rather than a science. Healthcare workers who are about 60 or
Dr. US, please mute yourself.
I'm going. It's fine.
I was telling Dr. US Agarwal to mute.
Yeah.
So it's really dilemma, because in prevailing scenario, the thing is, the healthcare provider should be absolutely healthy. And to keep yourself healthy, you can just cater the services to a common man, to alleviate the sufferings of a common man. And it is not advisable for everybody who is known for his caliber or his skills to deliver the goods to ask him to stay back. So what to do? A really tricky situation. On a tight rope, walk to a very thin rope is difficult question, difficult query to be answered. But I'll say, when prevention is the only way, precaution is the only way, बचाव में ही बचाव है, तो ऐसी परिस्थिति में, in this particular scenario, you will have to have all the protection and keep on delivering the goods to the people who are just standing in a queue outside your chamber or somewhere. But you have to be taking all the measures possible to protect your own self. Let it be wearing N95 mask, that too again a controversy, whether it provides you full support or not, full protection or not, or the presence of the ventilator or the vent over that would be advisable or not. So you can have N95 mask, as per most of the people are having consensus. Wear a shield in front of you. You can use the goggles if you are a spectacle wearing person. Most of the 60% are presbyopic. They are using that. And I was just going through the newspaper. They have just come out with the polycarbonate chambers, which give you full access to the patient, and patient is visible to you. And what I'm practicing today, I'll come out with that. It's not very popular amongst even the patients, even with the clinicians too. That is teledermatology. That's an option we can opt for. That will take care not only of your own safety, but also safety of the patients and their attendants too. So they have to go for work. We cannot sit idle at place. And if somebody seeks your help, seeks your medical advice, your expertise with so much experience, because you touching 60, maybe you're having comorbidities, take your own care first, and then you be in position to deliver the goods. That's my opinion, sir.
How about seeing on the this teledermatology?
Sir, I'm doing that. I've come up with that. I'm doing only teledermatology. Though I'm not 60, nearing 60, but with comorbidities, where no prophylactic drug is allowed and so many things, do's and don'ts are there. And I had been a member of the Central Protocol Committee of this medical college also. But they say, take your own safety first and then come out with the delivering services what the common man seeks.
Thank you, sir. This is okay. Now the question is a question to Dr. Saroj Purohit. Could you first unmute? What do you think about pregnancy? What is your take on pregnant women? You know, being a lady yourself, what do you think? Should pregnant women be practicing? That is my question.
So I think because pregnancy itself, somewhere the immunity of the lady is slightly compromised. We know it is supposed to be. So if a female is pregnant, I'm talking about that because there have not been much of literature or studies about.
There is no standard answer to this question. Absolutely.
Just taking whether she should be seeing the patients. So, but personally, what I feel is key if she can, because this is going to be just once in or maybe twice a lifetime. So she can just abstain from seeing patients for maybe.
Might have a dharna outside your house, madam.
You can stop seeing patients. I personally would feel that. And then after 6 to 9 months, we can start off. And at all, if it is essential, the person wants, they have, maybe she or he was your patient and wants to show you again with some severe problem and all, then proper precautions, as Dr. R.D. Mehta was saying earlier, you can take all precautions.
Your opinion is she should not be seen.
I personally feel that.
I just hope you don't have a
break if you do not see for 6 months.
I just hope you don't have dharna outside your house tomorrow. Okay, yeah, this is important, and you know, and this would be to Dr. Saroj. This is a question which I'd like to ask you. Does COVID-19 change the course of immune-mediated skin disorders? Does it actually change how these disorders manifest?
So basically, once after the lockdown, we have not really had much of chance of immune-mediated diseases. You know, basically what the patients are coming up is scabies and tinea, and you know. But yes, I think there might be some change because psoriasis patients, I don't know how it's. I don't really think there's going to be any change with COVID infection and immune-mediated skin diseases. Which we
I'd request
we consider
who would like to comment on this. Yes, Dr. Mehta.
Because they are not.
To the global burden of disease alerts, and the people who are just going through post-traumatic stress disorder, those given by psychologists, clinical psychologists, and what I have personally experienced, people who used to have the routine school summer, the honeymoon period, where they were off the symptoms, they were off the signs for psoriasis, they had exacerbation. Out of the 10 people are just going through after post-lockdown, they were all having no psoriatic lesions for last so many years, but all of a sudden with the post-traumatic stress disorder that the psychologists are using, the epidemiologists are using, that has given rise to hike in the numbers of the diseases which were supposed to be dormant during these summers also. So from March till September, we are getting excess number of cases as compared to what we used to get last few years.
Okay, I think that's something which we are seeing as well in our setup. Our OPDs are sort of going up. Today my OPD was 70, so our average is about 150, 200. So we've reached about 70. We are seeing a little more of some of these conditions, as I have put on this slide. So there is a mechanic of slight increase. Saurabh, is Saurabh there? Dr. Saurabh?
Yes, sir. Am I audible?
Yes, I want your comments on this.
Sir, actually, I feel that this is the era of filtration of disorders. So what we are getting nowadays are the ones which are either eager to seek our advice or have the most severe forms. We are getting some atypical disorders right now. And tinea scabies acne is actually continuing like before. But I feel there are some atypical manifestations which can be attributed to COVID also, like many of us may have seen urticaria patients and pityriasis rosea, more commonly I am seeing now. Some cases are there. Whatever limited number is coming among them, the proportion of these disorders has increased. So I feel COVID-19 affecting skin disorders is not that much true. Actually, it is just that the more selection, more sick patients or more atypical patients tend to come to our tertiary center now than the more typical ones.
Okay, actually, you mentioned about atypical pityriasis rosea. In fact, atypical pityriasis rosea and
yes, there are reports also, sir.
Yes, of zoster, increased incidence of zoster. So these are two which have been reported to be sort of increased. In fact, I'm seeing quite a few childhood zosters. I saw about 2 or 3 childhood zosters. So that is something which I'm seeing. And of course, as I put in the slide, some of these other conditions have also been seen to have aggravated. Yes, so this is my next question. Now, there are 2 parts to this. Any skin lesions which are associated with, which have prognostic value. I'm not going to discuss cutaneous manifestations of COVID here. So what I really want to know is any skin lesions which you see and you can probably tell the internist, look, I think this person might be landing up with more severe form. So anybody can sort of comment on that. So anybody can take that on. So if there is nobody, then Saurabh will come to you. So Saurabh will be answering all the questions. So Saurabh, batao. So any lesions are associated with a comparatively poorer prognosis?
Sir, I think I can't say this from my personal experience because we work in a tertiary center in AIIMS Jodhpur. So I have been in touch with our medicine colleagues and they are not having too much skin manifestations, to be frank. So there is no particular correlation from that standpoint, but from literature, if you see, then there have been several hypothesis-based papers and several case reports and case series. Some say that people who have endogenetic alopecia, like there are papers suggesting the hypothesis that more sick patients had endogenetic alopecia.
No, I was thinking about the skin manifestations of COVID.
Manifestations.
Out of the, those groups of conditions, which are these which could be associated with, like we know about the vascular issue.
Chilblains, yes, chilblains we know. And livedoid vasculopathy-like lesions we know.
Yeah.
So probably
and,
those could be associated with
vascular phenomena, I think would be more, sir, more associated with the severity of COVID illness per se, because they would be directly correlatable. Because COVID also is known to cause thrombotic phenomena.
Yes, so probably
it is pulmonary or CNS or any other system.
So I think that is important. So if any of us see any of these vaso-occlusive phenomena,
reticulate erythemas have been mentioned in some reports.
I think those are.
Dr. Tharkar was sharing some photographs.
Yes, Dr. Tharkar. Yes. Dr. Tharkar, I would now come to him.
Tharkar is from Mumbai.
Typical manifestations he has seen. Unfortunately, I couldn't put up those slides, but he has shared some interesting slides, manifestations. Dr. Kharkar, could you comment?
Yeah, yeah, couple of things, what I am seeing now. Now, what has happened is, as like you said, my OPD is also going to 50 to 70. I am 65 plus. So first I would like to share my experience of what happens to a 60 plus person when he sees 50 patients at a time. When you wear that mask, after that 50 patients, you start feeling a little dizzy. I took the pulse oximeter and checked my this thing. It came down to 95.
Even after 5 or 10 patients, you feel dizzy.
Yeah, I took my pulse oximetry. It was 95. When I take off my mask, then it comes back to 98. So that's one thing. So one advice to all elderlies: please do not shout. So I have learned that because that makes you very uncomfortable. So I now use a microphone. So that makes me very, very convenient and easy for me to talk. And that really is giving me good relief. So all 60 plus, please do that. That will help you.
Wonderful point. That's a wonderful point.
But talking about, yeah, we are talking about certain things which are coming in our way. Like, we see most of the patients who are coming every day, I see 3 to 4 post-COVID patients with dermatological manifestations. Either they are our psoriasis aggravated, or we see some erythematous lesions. I have seen at least 3 patients who are put on blood thinners because of the pneumonitis and thromboembolic phenomena, and they came with ecchymotic lesions. There's peticular hemorrhages. So many things are coming up now. And as you rightly said, multidromal zoster is being seen. I've seen 3 patients like that. Now the problem was that these atypical lesions which are coming, pityriasis rosea, as everybody is mentioning, we do see atypical pityriasis rosea either before COVID or after COVID. Both the times we are seeing that. So all these manifestations are
you
coming
saw
up differently.
multi-dermatomal herpes zoster.
Yeah.
Multi-dermatomal.
After COVID.
Right.
Yeah. After COVID.
Yeah. Now there is one thing which I was really interested in, and that is, COVID in the systems has got a link with a couple of conditions in the skin which have a sort of similar manifestations. One is livedoid vasculopathy, and one is, of course, antiphospholipid disease. These are 2 conditions which share a lot of manifestations as well as a therapeutic spectrum with COVID. So probably studying, a condition like livedoid vasculopathy might give us a little more insight on how COVID manifests in these systems, because livedoid vasculopathy in various ways manifests very similarly. So that's something which is interesting. It's really interesting. If you see the etiopathogenesis of livedoid vasculopathy, there are a lot of correlates with COVID. So that is one thing we can sort of tell our systemic colleagues, that we have actually been seeing a disorder which has some correlates with COVID. Okay, this is one question which I'd like to ask Saurabh. Saurabh, unmute yourself. You are the procedure man here.
Sir.
So
Yes,
do cutaneous procedures expose, and what cutaneous procedures expose the patient to increased chance of infection? Are there any? Is it possible for any skin procedures to expose the patient to increased chance of COVID?
Sir, actually, more or less reports have emphasized the respiratory route of entry for COVID virus. But recently, I came to know about a paper in Lancet. They have mentioned that they found COVID in skin. So that is one consideration. I can share that Lancet paper also.
Excuse me. I am always skeptical of listening this COVID word along with all the, because COVID means but only coronavirus induced disease.
Okay, sir.
So it is a corona is in the skin, not the
Right,
COVID.
sir.
Until unless it
Sir,
is
I should say
the disease.
SARS-CoV-2, sir. I think that
Yes.
would be more technical.
Sorry?
That is the correct terminology now. Yes.
Yes, sir. So SARS-CoV-2 they found in skin, and they in fact found that the virus had not produced any humoral immunity. So there have been such anecdotal cases, sir, but otherwise, I think whenever we do these procedures, they obviously impair the barrier. Whichever procedure is impairing the skin barrier or the mucosal barrier, the routes through which the virus can enter, they are a potential threat actually. But oftentimes we do the wounds heal very quickly if it is fairly superficial, and we do dressing, we do checkup, follow-up also. So it may not be very practical to suspect those routes as the portal of entry for the virus. But,
Absolutely. So you're absolutely right. Though these have been mentioned, however,
Yes,
they do not seem to be practically important. So I don't think a dermatological procedure actually exposes a patient to more risk of COVID. And that's something which we need to mention. You know, these are procedures which have been talked about theoretically, but I don't think they're of practical importance. So as you rightly mentioned, I don't think any dermatological procedure places a risk on the patients. And that's something which we need to sort of impress upon patients. Yes.
So, but the reverse is quite possible.
Yes,
Right.
Especially if we are operating on the mucosa.
We'll come to that. Yeah, now this is one thing we keep talking about, that we tell that patients should wear a mask when they come for consultation. But lots of patients have facial lesions. Most of the patients who come to us have got something on the face and they will immediately take off the mask. How does one circumvent this? And I'd like to ask our senior people here, any of the senior dermatologists or even our chairpersons, to sort of think how we can circumvent this. Patient will come wearing a mask. The moment the patient sits down, the patient says, I've got acne. Doctor, I mask utaru kya? And then that's it. So, I mean, what is the point of a patient coming with a mask and then immediately removing it? How do we sort of solve this? Anybody can comment. Anybody can. Yes, Dr. Kharkar, you mentioned.
I have made it very clear. Mehta. Before the patient enters my chamber, the receptionist tells the patient that your mask will be only removed when Dr. Kharkar tells you to remove. Otherwise, you're not going to take it down. So that's the only way we can help it out.
No, but so when do you tell them to remove?
Yeah.
Even if
first I listen to the complaints and then.
Even if the patient is having any lesion of acne or wanted to show these things, listen. Unless he is suffering from corona infection or anything else, which your staff must have been screened them by sanitizing and
they may be asymptomatic. They may be asymptomatic. Actually, I think the duration of exposure is probably so.
Right,
if he has
very,
to
very
the
right.
mask, it has to be for the shortest period of time. That probably is something. And what I have done is, made a small little mask which is like this. So you just make the patient wear this, and the patient's face is visible to you. So patient comes in wearing a mask which is only covers his mouth and nose. It's got a double-sided tape, and he puts it only there. So the entire face is open for exposed for view. So that's what I have told our
Manas, that is called as a bikini mask. That was shown on television by one of the channels. So that's it's called as a bikini mask.
Yes. So where make the Dr. Mehta, you wanted to say something.
Sir, Dr. Shukla also wants to make some comments.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Is not only the asymptomatic or somebody who can be COVID positive or COVID negative. It is basically the duration, the time of exposure to the person who is non-infected.
Yes,
how much is the minimum duration? How much minutes?
So it is 50 minutes.
15.
The CDC says it's 15 minutes.
15.
So probably we don't allow the patients to have more.
For a minute or two, sir. At least for a minute or two, we have to examine, and that's all. And we can also put back the mask.
Dr. Shukla sir was telling something.
Yes, Professor Shukla sir.
Exactly. I agree with Manas, and I really do it practically. I ask the patient not to put off the mask totally. But if I have to see something on the face, then I ask him to just cover the nose and the mouth only, and the rest of the area can be examined. So just like the bikini mask, what Dr. Kharkar was suggesting, that's good. If you have got bikini mask, provide him the bikini mask. Otherwise, ask him to cover the mouth and nose with the mask he is wearing. And in that meantime, you can just examine the patient. And again, ask him to cover the full mask.
Thank you. Okay, now this is one thing which I wanted to ask. We are wearing the N95 mask. Now, there are certain people who are, suggesting certain additional, protective. I just want to know, anybody are following this or not? Some people are asking patients to apply a povidone iodine, especially when doing procedures. or some doctors are putting a little bit of benzalkonium chloride in the nasal bridge before wearing the N95 mask. This apparently is said to give some additional protection. I just want to know, any of you are following this, especially doing procedures with povidone iodine around the nose? Yes, sir.
Can I put on one question before that?
Yes, sir. Yes.
What procedures should not be done during this era?
Oh, I'll come to that, sir. I'll come to that. Actually, I just wanted to sort of ask this question, whether anybody is sort of following this, and if not, I think it's not a bad idea to at least sometimes.
So far, we are refraining from, we are not doing any procedures right now.
Sometimes it might be necessary, so then, to do something on the face, like, for example, I, of course, am doing a lot of procedures. So I am doing this actually. I'm asking patients to apply a bit of, in fact, my staff do it. They tell the patient to apply the povidone iodine around the nose and around the mouth. And that is said to theoretically reduce transmission. And of course,
Dr. Manas?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, Dr. Manas, can I ask you, what mask are you using? N95 while doing a procedure, or you use the HEPA filters?
Okay, so N95. Now I'll just tell you this concept of mask. Now we need to understand that the N95 mask is tested from outside in. That means an N95 will prevent infection from going in. A triple layer mask, however, is tested from inside out. That means it will prevent the infection from going out. That means the patient should wear a triple layer mask because you don't want to get infected from the patient. Whereas you should wear an N95. Now the concept of the valve is, now as I said, the N95 mask is tested from outside in. So with a valve, the inside out becomes a risk. That means a doctor wearing an N95 with a mask can actually transmit. So that is why the concept of wearing a triple layer on top, the moment you wear a triple layer on top, the valve disadvantage is nullified, because now you remember what I've told you. The N95 is tested from outside in, it's untested from inside out. The valve ensures that somebody who's wearing an N95 might actually transmit from inside out. The triple layer is tested from inside out. And therefore, if you wear a triple layer on top, you are actually having, not allowing that disadvantage of the valve to actually manifest. So therefore, that is the basic idea of wearing a triple layer on top, and basic idea of why the patient should wear a triple layer, so that you don't get infected, because with a triple layer, he's not able to transmit infection, but he can get it. That is the concept of so this is the concept of how these masks are tested.
So we have to wear two masks. One is N95 and about the triple layer.
Absolutely. That is if you're wearing a valve, especially, and with an N95, if you wear a triple layer, you are definitely going to prevent infection.
But
both of these.
Probably that with valve masks, they are not at all advised in this sense.
No. The valve, as I told you, with the valve, the disadvantage of the valve is that it allows the infection from going from inside out, and therefore the moment you wear a triple layer on top, that disadvantage is nullified. Okay, so I'll just go to the next question. Yeah, this is a question. I'll just try and find out who wanted to answer this. Is immunosuppression? Yeah, Dr. Saroj Purohit, madam, this is a question for you. Is immunosuppression a risk factor or a poorer prognostic marker for COVID infection? Now, so if that means, if I am immunosuppressed, am I at a higher risk of getting COVID or more complications with COVID? Dr. Saroj, madam, is she there?
Saroj must have left for some cooking and making dinner or something like that. Okay. Or let us, anybody else can take it, please.
Yeah, anybody can take that on. Yes, Dr.
Rajesh is taking it.
Yes, Dr.
It's a real dilemma, because immunosuppression on the one end would make a person prone to suffer from. but a lot of immunosuppressants are being used to treat COVID also, COVID-2, SARS-CoV-2. So you have to just analyze the risk-benefit ratio and then decide it. Because most of the drugs being used are just working against the cytokine storm. And a person who is having already immunocompromised status and putting him on immunosuppression, one end it would aggravate the existing dermatological disorder, but on the other hand, ultimately what we have just seen would help the person to come out with the COVID. So to deal with the acute conditions of COVID with immunosuppressant modalities available, we are working at different interleukin levels of 17, 23, 21, 6 and whatnot. So I think there should be a proper balance of the risk of person surviving out of COVID. And secondly, then we have to tackle the dermatological condition as second priority. That's my version.
So that is, in fact, actually, there's just one study from Washington State actually which suggested that immunosuppression could actually be a comorbidity. You know, other than that, there has been no study which actually suggested that immunosuppression is a comorbidity, which can actually either make the person more prone to COVID or be associated with increased complications. Saurabh, I wanted your comments. Any of the other panelists are there? Is Dr. Ram Gulati there?
Vinod Jain, I saw. Dr. Singhi was there.
Dr. Lalit, any comment?
Yeah, Doctor. Yes, sir. Yes, I think Dr. Agarwal and Dr. Lalit wanted to say something. Dr.
Okay.
Dr. US Agarwal.
And who else?
Dr.
Lalit also wanted to say something.
No.
Okay, Dr. Kharkar has raised his finger. Dr. Kharkar, please.
Yeah. Can I talk about two things which we see? Actually, Dr. Dinesh Mathur is here.
Yes.
5 of my patients having HIV infection got infected.
Right.
4 were on ART. They got no problem. They came out of COVID without any problem. 5th one had stopped his ART for 1 year. CD4 count had fallen below 100 and he died. This is one thing which I saw. So patients who are on ART did as good or maybe as it was with any other normal person. Okay. Second patient I had, ENL, was put on 60 milligrams of prednisolone. Now he was on 60 milligrams for about a month and he developed COVID. Now even I thought that this might be a very bad thing to happen because there's a lot of immunosuppression there. But he came out without any pneumonitis or any complication, no storm, no cytokine storm, nothing. So I think we have to learn from here, what is going on really. Whether steroids really help to protect that.
They are definitely life-saving. Their steroids, they are not at all contraindicated, but it is better to give steroids in the later phase. In the earlier phase, when there is a viral this thing going on, but the steroids are much better during the cytokine storm stage. What the earlier we were discussing, probably steroids they are not at all contraindicated, but in the later stage of the corona infection. Whereas in the early time, and what you were talking of the ART, probably if you remember, during the earliest days, it was they were included in the armamentarium. They were included in the treatment schedule of these things. But later on, it was not confirmed. So people taking ART, I totally endorse with that. Nothing wrong in that. And steroids, they are life-saving in the later stage. That is what my concept, my take on that.
Absolutely. Saurabh, any comments? Saurabh, you're mute.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Sir, are we still on that immunosuppression?
Yes, absolutely.
Like immunocompromised. Okay.
Yes.
Sir, I think there are conflicting reports because many immunosuppression drugs, like there are literature on cyclosporin usage for coronaviruses as a treatment also. So cyclosporin, I have not had any problems using during this time period. And steroids also, more or less guidelines suggest that lower dosages must be used because it is, I think, fairly out of fear. Because in many of the cytokine storms, we know that dexamethasone, there was a trial from UK which proved that dexamethasone improved cytokine storm better than even tocilizumab. So it is still its knowledge is
give
coming up.
remdesivir
We are
in
not sure
early
till
stage and then steroids in the later stage.
Yeah, yes. May I make a comment on it, sir?
Sure, please.
Yes, Professor Agarwal,
As
please.
far as steroids are concerned, what literature says is that you should try to maintain the patient on less than 20 milligram prednisone. If you maintain it more, then in the early phases of the COVID, coronavirus infection, there may be a problem in early stages. But as Dr. Saurabh said, in the later stages, when the patient is on the stone, at that stage the steroids are useful. So it should not be given in the early stage. As far as our routine practice is concerned, what American Dermatology Society has said, Academy has said, that we should use all immunosuppressants in our routine patients. But if somebody gets infected, if they is symptomatic or even positive, then we should stop all immunosuppressants. And as that Manas has already put this slide, that the immunosuppressant is not a comorbidity. As you see, all the comorbidities like diabetes, hypertension, obesity, everything is there in the COVID, but not immunosuppression. So what I feel is that routinely, whatever we are using should be used only in case when the patient gets infected, is positive, is symptomatic, then only the immunosuppression should be stopped. Other than cyclosporine is said to be more dangerous because it causes hypertension, which is also a comorbidity. So out of all immunosuppressant, cyclosporine and azathioprine in atopic dermatitis and infliximab in psoriasis. There are three which have been mentioned in the literature, which may be more harmful and others are safe.
Thank you, sir. Actually, the funny thing is, this data of immunosuppression and risk of more severe infection actually comes from swine flu data. It doesn't come from coronavirus data at all. In fact, even previous coronaviruses actually have gotten better with immunosuppression. So this data of this fear of immunosuppression is actually coming out of previous swine flu data and data on lupus. So lupus patients do not seem to be doing very well with COVID, and there is a reason for that. And I've mentioned this. What happens is that the ACE2 gene, now this ACE2 gene, COVID actually demethylates the ACE2 gene, and that gets overexpressed. And that is the problem, and that is why in active lupus, there is increased chances of the COVID becoming more severe, not only increased chance of infection and increase. So out of all immunosuppressed disorders, lupus, and because lupus has a particular mechanism, and the mechanism is basically the demethylation of the ACE2 gene. So that is the reason why lupus is associated with a worse prognosis. Not only that, hydroxychloroquine does not protect lupus patients. So if you've got a lupus patient, given hydroxychloroquine, you tell them, are you getting hydroxychloroquine? You are protected. Unfortunately, hydroxychloroquine does not seem to protect. It protects everyone else, does not protect lupus only because of demethylation of the ACE2 gene. So if you have a patient of lupus, tell him, mostly sister, be a little more careful because you're much more prone. So that's one thing which I'd like to sort of mention here, because this is something we see quite often.
Should it be stopped during the corona days?
Which one?
Lupus, hydroxychloroquine.
Hydroxychloroquine, no, why should we stop? What we are saying is that
in lupus patients.
No. Hydroxychloroquine does not protect them. You see, like it protects others, and there are various mechanisms. I don't want to go into that, but it does not protect lupus patients. So therefore, so they should not be under a false sense of security. Right. Since we are taking hydroxychloroquine, we are protected. That is what I wanted to sort of drive home here.
There is one more thing about hydroxychloroquine. It can increase the psoriasis. So we should be careful in psoriatic patients of using hydroxychloroquine.
Yes, we are coming to
and there is one more point also I want to add.
Yes, sir.
That immunosuppressants may be rather useful in COVID patients.
Yes, definitely. That's what.
There is another view. There is another view that the using immunosuppressant in a routine patient may be rather useful because they are less likely to go into the storm.
Actually, I'm using everything. I'm using everything, including.
Yeah, we should not discourage using all these things. And another point is that like in psoriasis, it is associated with many comorbidities. If you don't treat properly psoriasis, then the comorbidities are likely to be increased, which can then further increase the mortality in the COVID infection.
Yeah, just like.
So in one way, the immunosuppressant which we are using may be protective in our patients.
That's right.
And this is what I'm speaking from the literature. They also have the same view that they should be continued. Even American Academy has said it, that everything should be continued except when the patient gets infection. Then you should stop.
Absolutely. So that's something which we. So as I said, so it's, for example, I just give the info. So if you have severe lupus, you are actually exposing yourself to more severe COVID. So
this is one of them.
If you are having more severe psoriasis, that is indirect. Of course, in severe psoriasis, indirectly with comorbidities, with aggravation of comorbidities, you are exposing yourself to more severe COVID. So it's more important probably to treat these conditions well rather than be more conservative sometimes, especially in conditions such as lupus and as well as Dr. U.S. Udva mentioned, in psoriasis. We need to treat these conditions optimally to ensure that comorbidities do not become more dangerous for the patients when they actually do develop COVID infection. Now, Dr. Agarwal sir, this is again for you, and this is regarding psoriasis. So as you've mentioned, of course, you've given your observation. My question is, it's always discussed that when we are treating these patients, we should not do a lot of monitoring, reduce laboratory investigations. Now, what is your suggestion on the reduction? What all are the laboratory investigations that we can actually reduce? Now, suppose you have a patient on methotrexate. So what laboratory investigation can we reduce? We say that avoid going to the lab.
Frankly speaking, whatever has been mentioned in the literature, if we usually don't follow strictly all the investigations and all the frequency of the tests which are there advised. I usually depend on the counts and OTPT in my patients who are in methotrexate or on the azathioprine. And at the end of the 3 months, I get all other tests included. So routinely, I don't have all the bacteriology tests done in every monthly, 2 monthly, whatever has been recommended in the literature, because it becomes very cumbersome for a patient to get all these tests. So especially in COVID area, you don't want to send your patients to the laboratory again and again. So we can reduce the number. And as far as the azathioprine and methotrexate is concerned, my personal experience is that routine counts and liver function tests may be sufficient to be getting done frequently, and infrequently we can, at the more interval, we can get liver, kidney function test and other
tests. So actually speaking, of course, this I am not going to mention. Now, in psoriasis, is that drugs such as cyclosporin, the adverse effects are actually, or the immunosuppression, as I said, even immunosuppression itself, whether it is important as far as COVID is concerned, is not sure. But the doses which we use in dermatology, that's one thing we need to understand. Even drugs such as cyclosporin is not the kind of dosage which actually could become dangerous as far as COVID is concerned. So we use lower dosages. Most of these studies on cyclosporin causing significant immunosuppression are almost double the dosages that we use in dermatology. So of course, methotrexate definitely a better risk profile than azathioprine. Of course, apremilast has been discussed. I'm not going to discuss apremilast again. Cyclophosphamide alone, we don't use it, of course, much in psoriasis. We use it in bullous disorders much more. But as far as biologics is concerned, I think infliximab was mentioned. So infliximab, of course, I'm using, as I said, I'm using everything. I use each and every drug, including rituximab, infliximab, everything. But yes, infliximab, some people do have a bit of this thing, but all these specific blockers in terms of biologics are probably not unsafe. So that is one thing sort of we need to keep in our mind. But one thing I think, which I follow, is avoid multiple immunomodulators or multiple immunosuppressants.
Combination should be avoided.
More than one drug, you know, and especially in the elderly and those with comorbidities and those with recurrent respiratory infections. I think it's better to avoid 2 drugs, better to avoid 2 immunosuppressants at the same time. That is probably one thing. But if you're using a certain single immunosuppressant and the patient is doing well, as Dr. Agarwal has very rightly mentioned, I don't think we should sort of stop it.
And also, sir, in
the
transplant patients who are at the high dose of the tacrolimus or even systemic cyclosporine, they have done well. There are reports that who got the infected, they did well.
Yes, sir.
With COVID.
Absolutely right, sir. So this is a question for Dr. Mehta.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So, what about vesiculobullous disorders such as pemphigus? You know, we keep saying that. What about? So, what is the role of DCP? Should we give DCP? Should we not give rituximab? Not give rituximab? So what is your take on the current time?
I'm die-hard fan of DCP, and at my center, when you were there at Jodhpur conference also, I just wanted to argue with you. This is, I'll say, real peanut for a common man, which works as an almond. Garib ka badam aise. And it is cost effective. As far as the side effects are concerned, we are having almost on an average, we are continuing with DCP at our center. On an average, 10 cases in a month are there, or coming even from the remote sites also. So they are doing very well even in this era also, with that much not very heavy dose of steroids. US Agarwal sir was starting 20 milligram penicillin. I'm using DCP, and none of them had any other complications pertaining to use of DCP, and they went well ahead, and the prognosis is as good as was in pre-COVID era. So my version remains as we can continue with that. I don't have much of experience with rituximab or any other immunomodulator because being costly drug and not affordable to a common man at our center, at our geographical distribution. So DCP is the main stream of treatment as far as us is concerned. And I'm happy with the results even in this post or ongoing COVID era also, sir.
Anybody else, any of the other panelists who would like to comment on that? I would like any comments from any of the other faculty here. Yes, Saurabh. Unmute yourself.
Sir, I think Dr. Kharkar wanted to say something. Sir, you go on.
Yes, Dr. Kharkar.
I would just like to point out that I have been giving all my patients rituximab. They have done extremely well. And the confidence comes from the hemato-oncologist. They are using rituximab left, right, and center in the lymphoma protocols. And since I saw them doing, I have continued and my patients have done extremely well. None of them have got COVID.
I couldn't agree with you more. I am using rituximab pretty regularly. So I mean, and Dr. Mehta's experience with DCP, I'm sure would be really important that he's been using DCP. That's pretty bold, because it's said that the use of cyclophosphamide alone probably may not be that much of a problem. But if you're using cyclophosphamide with steroids, it seems that the risk is probably a little bit more. But again, your experience, I think, would stand all of us in very good stead. All of us who are, thinking whether we should use it or not. I think that is an excellent comment and excellent experience that you have. And there's no substitute to actually having the practical experience. Now, IVIG.
One point I wanted to make.
Yes, Dr. Lalit.
Yes,
just hold on.
Dr. Manas, we have several patients on DCP, as Dr. Mehta said. And initially, when the epidemic broke out, we were hesitant to, give DCP to our patients. But subsequently, we have started doing that again. Secondly, those patients who are, relatively in remission phase, we have half the dose in some of the patients of steroids. So maybe if we are giving 100 milligrams daily for 3 days, we have made it to 50 milligrams and see what has been the response. And I've seen that most of these patients have done equally well on 50 milligram dexamethasone also. So maybe that could be another approach, that if a patient is doing well, And if he's under your regular follow-up, you could reduce the dose of steroids at least. So that is what I.
Okay, so that is.
I would ask
yes,
a question at this stage that 98% of the patients of the COVID, they.
Sir, आप अपना कैमरा को थोड़ा नीचे करेंगे sir?
हाँ. You are not visible. You, yeah, right.
Yes, sir. Now it is good. Now it is good. At least we can see your face.
98% of the patients of the COVID are going to recover. The mortality is less than 2%. So we cannot stop all our conventional drugs for the fear of the 2%. And whatever literature suggested that even on the immunosuppression, they do well. So it is only by chance that somebody gets ARDS. It's not the. Otherwise, it is I think the susceptibility of a particular person of going into ARDS.
Absolutely, sir. I think you hit the nail on the head, and with Dr. Lalit's and also Dr. Mehta's.
One really gets confidence.
Yes. Yes. So it's so important to have these things. So probably if you're giving BCP therapy. Theory says that cyclophosphamide with steroids might be a bit of an issue, but I've put a but there, and the but is basically because, again, a lot of experience coming in of people using this steroids and cyclophosphamide not causing problems. In fact, it's said that you can use pulse cyclophosphamide if you're not giving daily cyclophosphamide. But rituximab, again, it's said to blunt the vaccine response, but I've been using rituximab and the experience from Dr. Lalit and of course Dr. Kharkar on use of rituximab is there. So it's something which we've been using. Of course, once we start getting these C5 inhibitors, they might be nice. I wish we had these C5 inhibitors now because they look at the bullous diseases and they look after COVID as well. So anyway, these are drugs which are not available with us, BTK inhibitors and C5 inhibitors. So these are newer drugs which probably if we would have had might have given us more options, but keeping in view our collective experience, I think we can go ahead treating these patients as we were treating before. And as Dr. Agarwal has nicely summed up that look, we need to treat these patients and we need to treat these patients with the best drugs because a patient with pemphigus can die of pemphigus if you don't treat him adequately. He's got severe disease. So he may not die of COVID, he may not be having COVID, but to protect him, you'll kill him from pemphigus. So that's...
and as we already know that two of our drugs,
collateral damage,
brodalumab, have already been tried and found useful in the COVID. Two biologicals are being used. One is the itolizumab.
Absolutely.
So we have to prevent the collateral damage.
Yes. This is one thing which I am doing, and that is people who have been using, who have been giving regular rituximab. I have tested all of them once for immunoglobulin level, and this is one thing because up till now I have not found hypogammaglobulinemia in any one of them. But this is one thing which I am doing, something which one can think of at least in your patients who are on regular rituximab. This is one thing which I have sort of started doing. Atopic dermatitis. Yes, any of the panelists, severe atopic dermatitis, where we have been using cyclosporin, are you still using? I'll tell about myself, I am using. So anybody else who is, yes, Dr. Mehta.
Yes, I'm just continuing with cyclosporin both in adult and the pediatric age group, and they are doing wonderful.
Dr. Lalit wanted to mention.
Yes, I endorse what Dr. Mehta says. We have been using it regularly.
So I think I've been using steroids and I've been using, so I have not really changed my treatment modality, though we don't have dupilumab available to us, so it's said to be safe. Again, retinoids don't seem to work, and we don't have those good drugs available to us. So I think cyclosporin are our go-to agents here and they seem to work well. SGS10, any change in your treatment?
Fortunately, we have had, very, very limited number of patients of SGS-TNS. Maybe I can recall one or two only. So, but we have persisted with our approach. But we normally use cyclosporin in these patients as a first-line agent, not steroids now. We used to use steroids in the past.
Yeah, I think all of us are using cyclosporin now.
Yes.
And of course, I am using, we
Oral
had
tacrolimus, I think you
with COVID, with TN. So that patient I gave IVIG.
Yes, that's
But other than
another
that, I am
theoretically.
using cyclosporin. Yes. Of course, we don't have things such as plasmapheresis because that also requires concurrent immunosuppressive. Otherwise, you have a rebound. So it really doesn't help. So connected disorders, as I told, I mean, yes, I mentioned about, about lupus. I'm treating these patients aggressively for lupus only because of one reason: a more severe lupus gives more severe COVID. Anybody treating any of your connective tissue disorder patients differently? Again, any comments on that, or you are treating the same way? Because we are using low dose steroids, we are using absolutely the same. Any comments on patients with your patients with lupus and dermatomyositis and systemic sclerosis?
We have been using methylprednisolone pulses in many of our patients.
I think this should be a take home for all the entire audience, that look, these senior faculty members, I think, are using everything the way they were, and their patients seem to be doing well. Thank you so very much. So this is an interesting chart on relative suppressants of these various drugs, just for people who find it interested. But again, as I said, we are not really following this. We are treating everything. I've started using everything as of now. But I don't use a lot of DCP. Yes, anybody using JAK inhibitors? Anybody using JAK inhibitors here? So then, anybody any experience?
Still a theoretical avenue.
Yes, I think
One
one
more thing I would like to add. As
yes,
far as combination of the immunosuppressant is there, like you are all mentioning the lupus and everything. So one and the steroid plus one immunosuppressant is allowed. But if you combine in any condition one steroid and two immunosuppressant, then it may increase the risk of may harm in the COVID.
So,
so routinely we use one steroid plus one, and we should try to keep the dosage of steroid less than 20 milligram prednisolone. And if it can be less than 10 milligram, then it will be quite safe.
20 milligram, of course, is your immunosuppressive dose, and people also say that less than 15 milligram for less than 3 weeks. That's another sort of point of view. But I think 20 milligram, as you rightly mentioned, is said to be the sort of watershed line for immunosuppression. But as I said, I mean, I am very frankly not following this. Let me be very frank and clear. I am giving whatever the patient needs, and I really haven't sort of faced a problem here. JAK inhibitors, the problem, some tofacitinib at least sometimes could be impairing the interferon response, increasing venous.
It's expensive, sir. Very expensive.
One thing, yeah. So tofacitinib, of course, we fortunately get it. So again, I am sort of holding back on tofacitinib a bit because the antiviral activity is not demonstrated with tofacitinib. Baricitinib and ruxolitinib have shown antiviral activity, not tofacitinib. So I'm sort of holding back tofacitinib, not for for any other effect except for venous thromboembolism. That's why I'm using IVIG also very, very selectively. Just one patient I've used who had COVID with 10. That's the only patient where I'd used it. Again, venous thromboembolism is something which I'm more concerned rather than the viral effect itself. This is a question I think Dr. Kharkar had asked in our group. When can we start immunosuppressants post-COVID infection? Anybody can comment on that. Anybody can comment. Kharkar sir, I think you can also comment if you want.
Yeah, I talked to this specialist of COVID nowadays in Mumbai, and I asked them that what should I do? And they told me that you should wait to see that there are no complications in the lung or post-COVID lung complications. Do 2 RT-PCRs, and if they are negative, after 15 days, you could start. Now, everything is being postulated, experience being shared. But this is what I was told. 2 RT-PCRs negative, no pulmonary complications post-COVID, and then you could think of starting.
Okay, so yes, some people do mention this period of 30 days or 1 month.
Yeah,
but again,
so it goes to 1 month. Yeah.
So that is. So a lot of dermatological drugs are used in COVID. Now I wanted each and every panelist's favorite. People have used, let's say, our hydroxychloroquine. which we call our hydroxychloroquine. Then, so many our drugs. So what is your favorite?
Ivermectin.
Ivermectin. So any favorite?
Ivermectin.
Doxycycline and ivermectin coming a good winner.
Okay.
So both are our drugs.
So I'll tell you my favorite. My favorite is pentoxyphylline actually.
Okay.
And
is it available at your place? It's very
pentoxyphylline is available in my OPD. Yes, it's available. I have pentoxyphylline.
No. Of late it has made me available.
Sir, actually, frankly speaking, everything is available with the armed forces nowadays. Not with others.
So I like pentoxyphylline and doxycycline, and I've mentioned why I like them. I'm not going to sort of read them. The thing about doxycycline is that it creates zinc compounds on MMPs, and coronaviruses actually need MMPs to survive. So that's interesting theoretically as far as doxycycline is concerned. And pentoxyphylline, we know. In fact, one of my first publications was pentoxyphylline type 2 lepra reaction in IJL. So anti-TNF, of course. So that is anyway, antiviral, immunomodulators. These are my two interesting drugs which I want some of the internists to take on, especially pentoxyphylline. I think this is my last, or maybe last but one question, and this is to Saurabh. So precautions, one needs to do surgery, lasers and injectables and peels. So what are your set of? Now I have put my set of precautions. So what do you tell patients when you are doing surgical procedures? I'll be very frankly, I'll tell you, I am doing everything other than hair transplants. That is because it takes a long period of time. So any procedure which takes less than half an hour, most of our procedures do take less than half an hour. I'm not doing long vitiligo surgeries, small little patches which I can come in and out in 15 minutes. So I am sort of restricting myself to procedures which are less than 15 minutes. So that's why I'm not doing long procedures. I think that has been my sort of, this thing is duration. So any other particular precautions, Saurabh, you are taking, because of course you are the dermatosurgeon in this panel?
Sir, more or less what I would say here is that I am deferring all my facial scar revision or BCC or cancer surgeries. That is most important. Unless it is melanoma or SCC, we anyways refer. But for basal cell carcinomas that we were doing selectively, so we are deferring for 3 to 6 months for now. Yes. And that is for dermatologic surgery.
How about aerosol producing lasers?
Yes, sir. So that major concern is with lasers actually. Whether it is CO2 laser or whether it is with Nd:YAG. There are no proven studies, sir. The only thing that people say is that you keep wearing N95 mask and face shields. It is quite tricky using these while doing lasers also. Even if you have that smoke evacuators, because there is a lot of fogging inside the glasses when you use this. But there are some tricks that you fold the mask at the nose bridge in some way. One report is there from our department also. And we are
put a tissue in between the nose and
put a tissue in between. That is also another trick. If you are wearing the glasses, you put the glass over the metallic edge of the mask so that it doesn't fog. So these are some of the tricks. Some people are even pre-warming their glasses to avoid fogging of the glasses. So that is another trick. I got to know it from one of my friends, so I'm not using it. So those are some of the things.
So basically, as I said,
procedure, sir. No other procedure is actually harmful, or it is not having much risk to us actually.
So I'm actually doing this. I'll tell you, I am sort of basically being duration oriented rather than procedure oriented. And any procedure, in fact, I did a mucosal biopsy on a oral pemphigus patient had exclusive oral lesions. I was pretty sure he's got pemphigus, and the biopsy and DIF has shown pemphigus. In fact, I gave him rituximab 2 days back. So of course, if I'm doing
we are also doing mucosal biopsy, like all biopsies we are doing.
But I am using full PP if I'm using a mucosal procedure. If I'm opening the mouth, I'm using a full PP, complete PP if I'm opening the mouth. That's the only thing which I'm probably doing. Even peels, but yes, definitely we are asking patients not to open their mouth and speak when we are doing procedures on the face or doing peels. So tell them to keep your mouth shut. Lasers, I think basically non-plume generating lasers. I think vascular lasers, energy-based devices. So these can be done. Of course, the only lasers we
Even
have.
hair removal doesn't generate plumes, sir. So
hair removal lasers actually also do generate plumes. So that is another.
Minor amount, but much less than CO2 and NDAC, sir.
As well as Q-switch NDAC. So Q-switch NDAC, what I'm doing is I'm putting a film on top of the skin and shooting the laser through the film. So I'm putting a cling film on the skin and shooting the laser through the cling film. So that is one thing which I'm doing. But basically keeping procedures less than 15 minutes.
That would alter the fluence, sir, no? In some way. What do you think,
Not really, no, not really. At least I'm not getting different results. I haven't really done a study. In fact, no study has been done on use of cling films and Q-switch. I think Saurabh, you can plan one. So
maybe, sir.
I think we are done. I think we are sort of done. I think that is my last slide. So I think any take home, at least from my side, before I talk about myself, I'd request the panelists give their take home messages. If anybody can sort of comment on any take home message from the panelists. Professor
Dr. Manas, I have a question for you or Dr. Kharkar. Anyone can take up that. Is there a role of MMR which is coming up in a big way in COVID these days? So can anyone answer that?
So MMR vaccine, yes, people. In fact, all these vaccines have MMR, BCG. Both these two vaccines have been sort of talked about. But again, we don't really have evidence as of now. Maybe in the next few months we might get some evidence. MMR theoretically seems to be good, but let us see how it. In fact,
BCG has been taught more for that.
Yes, so let us see. It's sort of early days, but I feel that, one of the important things which we should sort of take home from this panel is do what you have to do. Take the precautions, but do not neglect the precautions. And I think all the senior members much more immunosuppressive things like DCP. I have not done DCP, but people are doing DCP. Dr. Mehta has mentioned it, and I feel so. Youngsters should, I think, take from this fact, not to mention that we should all take heart from the fact that look, people are doing it. I think we should not fear to our medical keeping some precaution tenets in mind. Anything else that any of the other panelists would like to mention for the audience? I think if there's no other comments, I'd hand over to Dr. Dinesh Mathur for the closure.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks a lot, Dr. Manas, for a really very interesting panel. I would request our chairperson, Dr. S.R. Shukla, and Dr. Rishi Bhargav, sir, if they are here to kindly sum up the session. Dr. Shukla, sir, you unmute yourself.
I think we had a very good discussion, and the things are now much clearer than what they were, and such sort of discussion is always required, and especially in this era. And everybody has done very well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, and thanks all the people, those who are very patient.
Can I come out? Can I come out with
Yes,
my?
doctor. Yes.
Sure.
Yeah. Prevailing scenario, dermatology, COVID. I'll come out with the Urdu couplet, what I'm in habit of doing. Dr. Lalit will appreciate that. I don't end anything without speaking something different, because I had tried to mix academics with philosophy.
Sir, all of us appreciate that, sir.
I just want to change the taste with so highly academic session going on. COVID and dermatology. कौन कहता है आसमां में सुराख नहीं हो सकता? कौन कहता है आसमां में सुराख नहीं हो सकता? तबीयत से एक पत्थर तो उछालो यारो, तबीयत से एक पत्थर तो उछालो यारो, लेकिन ये ध्यान रहे कि वो पत्थर हमारे ऊपर आके ना गिरे. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. And
thank you, everyone.
Thanks all, especially Dr. Kharkar, who took the time from Mumbai, all our chairpersons, Dr. Bhargav sir.
Thank you,
and all our panelists who have taken so much of interest and done this evening very well. Thank you very much, and good night all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dinesh ji. Thank you.
Right, sir.